Today is September 12th, 2019, and thank you so much for meeting with me here in Gander.
You're welcome. It's great to finally meet you.
Can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Diane Davis, and I am a retired teacher from Gander Academy.
Where were you when you heard about 9/11?
On September 11th, I went to work at Gander Academy, which is right out the window. I can see it right now across the road from my house. And my husband went to work at the military base. He was a janitor at Gander Academy, but also worked part-time at the military base. And because there was a strike for the school board personnel, we had no school buses, and so it was a little bit chaotic. The parents were told what time to bring the students in. Because we have 920 students, the parents didn't want to get caught in the traffic, so it was very haphazard when children arrived. So we started the day, and kids kept coming, and a little bit after 10 o'clock, a parent came in and told us that she said, "A plane just hit the Twin Towers. I'm here to get my son." And for me, that was two unrelated statements. So first we'd heard of the planes, and it just seemed strange to me. I just thought it was an accident, and then in my head I thought it's really strange that you would send him at 9 and pick him up at 10, assuming that the child had an appointment. Then within a few minutes, another mother came in and said, "The second plane just hit, I want my kids now," and she was very intense. And all of a sudden, the two statements were related. We still didn't know what it meant, but we knew it was bad. And that was our first real awareness that something more tragic or scary than an accident was happening. I was teaching grade 3 at Gander Academy, and it was 18 years ago. So there was no Facebook, there was no social media. Even streaming the news on a computer was difficult, especially with computers we had 18 years ago. It would have not been appropriate. Had we had the television, to turn a television on with 8-year-old children. So we just kind of got through the morning. Two of my colleagues had cell phones. Again, most people did not have a cell phone 18 years ago. And it would have been deemed inappropriate to have a cell phone in a primary classroom. These colleagues had them because one, her husband was an RCMP, and the second one, her husband was an air traffic controller. So because of the nature of their spouse's work, and in order to coordinate things for kids, if someone got called out to work, they had these basically for emergency contact. So because of that, and the nature of the two men's jobs, police and air traffic control, we started to get just a little bit of information in our hallway. We heard that there were planes landed. We heard that all the hotel rooms had been booked. Just scant information. We came home at lunchtime, which was always our practice, all the way across the road for lunch, and turned on the television, and that was the first time we saw it. I think that was the first time I became aware of the other attacks, because really we only had the information that 2 planes had hit and planes were landing in Gander. Because of the time difference between New York and Gander, during our lunch hour, we turned on the television and we watched the towers fall live. And then we had to go back to work. And lunch hour would have been probably a little bit short, again because of the buses being on strike. We had to be back to school because, again, parents were dropping kids off whenever they wanted to rather than the assigned times. The afternoon then was spent on kind of crowd control and keeping people calm. We spent a lot of time looking out in the hallway trying to make eye contact with other teachers to see if anyone heard any news. checking to see if people were okay. With my students, we talked about it, and we talked about the fact that we knew something very terrible had happened and that people had to have died. I cautioned them about calling it news. The critically literate teacher, I knew we didn't have, I explained to them that we didn't have all the facts. We didn't know who did it. We didn't know why they did it. We can assume it probably was not an accident to be two planes, but that we have to be careful calling things news until we actually have some facts about it. But it was indeed terrible. Then I tried to reassure them that it was far away from us. It was in New York. And Gander children are very savvy regarding aviation. Their parents might be air traffic controllers, their parents might be pilots. Most of my Gander kids, not all, but a large number of my Gander kids fly to Florida on holidays. The bulk of them have been on planes. So telling them it was far away didn't really reassure them. One student looked at me and said, "Madame, you can refuel a plane in the air," which immediately gave me a sense that these kids were already anticipating that they might, for some reason, be in danger being in Gander, which, you know, was kind of a shock. And I made more effort to kind of keep things calm. Then there was an announcement asking students to take their personal belongings home. So everyone, there was uproar again. And even with the teachers, what does that mean? So I explained to my colleagues and to my students, and I'm known, if I don't know the answer, I will make something up. But I did know that there was an emergency measures plan for Gander because one of my friends worked at the town hall, and we've discussed some things about it one time when it was in development maybe. And I knew that emergency measures plans were always being revised depending on different issues. So I explained to the kids that there would be an emergency plan, just like we have fire drills. And that we do fire drills every month, but we don't have fires. And that fires happen very rarely. And the fire drill is just so that you would be practiced in case of an emergency. And I explained to them too that Gander's plan was probably a lot related around if there was an air crash. And then they got wound up again. And I said, but you have to realize we've had air crashes here. We talked about the Silent Witness and the crash that was the 101st Airborne, because we'd visited that site. And I said, it can happen, but it's very rare. So the town would have a plan, probably based around that, but maybe part of their plan is that they would use the school. And if there's all these planes here, people are probably going to have to come to the school. And they said, would they sleep here? And I said, well, yeah, they would have to, because if there's a lot of people, they have to sleep somewhere. And then it became hilarious. The children, the concept that someone would sleep at the school just brought a level of humor to it that the kids had never perceived. So that was interesting. During the afternoon, one of my colleagues came to me, Nicole Ozon came to me, and it's been 18 years and I still haven't asked her, and I need to ask her. Her husband was a police officer, RCMP officer at the time, but Nicole came to me and asked me if I could coordinate the teachers to provide food or do whatever was needed. She said, there's going to be a lot of people, they're going to need food. She said, I can do a pot of soup or something, but can you organize it? And I said, yeah, I said, that's not a problem, I can do that. I wonder now if that was a discussion between her husband, the police officer, seeing what the needs were going to be, and maybe reaching out to her, and she said, well, I'll check with Diane. I don't know, I need to find that out someday. But she came to me and asked me if I could do that, so I said, yes, I could do that. And I went to the principal of the school, Wayne Witherall, and I offered to be the contact person for the staff at Gander Academy if they needed help, and he just gave me a staff list almost like. And Nicole probably came to me because I was head of the social committee, and we already had process in place when there was an emergency on staff, if there was a death in a family or something like that. And she knew that I could do this, and I knew that I could do this, and I knew that I had a staff that when help was needed, they would help. So it was not it seemed like a natural thing to me to offer to do that when I was asked. So I made an announcement in the school before I left that day that I had a staff list and that I would be registering at the town hall, and that if there was anything needed, we would use the telephone tree to call staff and make them aware. And from school, I went to the town hall. When I went into the town hall, there, just inside the door, there was a table with two of the secretaries at the table. I know Sharon Moulton was there, and I can't remember who the other one was. And they had books in front of them, and it was basically like a registry. So I registered and told them that I was representing the staff of Gander Academy, that I had 50 to 60 names in my pocket, and that I felt that I could count on half of them if something was needed. And so they just took my information, wrote a note that it was staff Gander Academy, took my phone numbers, and got rid of me. Because they did not, at that point, need townspeople coming in telling them what to do. So it was a very quick in and out and on our way. I don't remember there being a crowd of people around or anything like that. Then I came home again, and Leo would have been home because he was on school time then and on strike. And we watched the news and became more aware of what was happening. We had something to eat, and then we drove up towards the airport. And when you drive up to the airport, you go up Airport Boulevard, and just before you get to the airport, there's a road that branches out to the left. And the road was blocked going to the airport. No one could pass, but you could circle around to the left. And it was bumper to bumper traffic. Oz Fudge, the town police officer, was there directing traffic, and it was just bumper to bumper. We were just creeping along, and as we turned and went down that road, the runways are perpendicular to that road. It has since been landscaped because of regulations and security measures that have been brought in since 9/11. But at that time, you could drive down that road and look right down the runways because they were low. It's landscaped now, so you can't see the runways. And looking down the runways, it looked as though the large aircraft were parked and smaller aircraft were actually underneath them. From the aerial shots, I know that's not true, but that was the perspective that I saw when I drove by, is so many planes that they were like stacked. People were still on the planes, of course. You could see them in the windows. You could see doors open on the aircraft. No stairs to go up to them. There weren't stairs for 38 planes. Easier to keep control of people if they can't get out of an aircraft. And a police car circulating, RCMP police car circulating up and down. So we drove by and we saw this, and I looked at Leo and I said, I have to go back to the town hall. Somehow I thought there was something I could do. So I dropped him home and I went back to the town hall. And when I went in, someone came down over the stairs from where I know would have been the main meeting room, and he said we need 8 people to set up the high school and the junior high to stack furniture to make room on the floor for passengers to sleep. I said, I can do that. And they kind of all looked at each other with those two looks of recognition. One being, she can do that. She's got the skills. The other one being, if we don't give her a task, she's going to keep coming back. So they knew it was also a means to get rid of me. They said 8 people, no more. They were very specific about that. So I asked if I could use a phone. They gave me a phone. I phoned 6 people from my list. And I picked up my stepdaughter Lisa, and we went to the first school. And when we arrived, there were 20 of us. Because everyone I phoned someone else and said, I got a job, I got a task. We started at the first school stacking furniture and chairs. And initially we were moving computers out of the way, and we very quickly started talking that out and realized that some people may be able to use the computers. Again, 18 years ago, very few people had email. If they had email, many of them did not know how to use it outside of work. And then being in a foreign country might have added a whole other element of how they might be able to reach the email. So, but we did recognize and realize that maybe some of them could use it. So then we started leaving the computers foremost in the room and stacking everything else. We did 2 schools, and teachers from those schools started arriving and helping, and it went fairly quickly. And then we came back to Gander Academy, I would think maybe around 8:30 at night. And there was at least 100 volunteers already in the building. Furniture was stacked. Blankets and bedding were coming in. Food was coming in. Because of the experience with the computers in the other school, I went through the whole building and wrote usernames and passwords and put them on the monitors of all the computers so that when people got to the school, they would be able to get onto our network and then be able to try and make contact if they had the means by email. Then it just kind of got quiet because there was no passengers. Food kept coming, people kept coming. I don't remember watching it on television at that time. Leo took coaxial cable out of our house and carried it across to Gander Academy and hooked up the second television. We only had 1 television on cable at Gander Academy 18 years ago. There's probably none there now. So we set up a TV in the theater and a television in the library. And we started a food station in the theater and a food station in the staff room. We had no cafeteria, and there was 2 showers in the school in the gymnasium. That was it. And we waited. And after midnight, between midnight and 1 o'clock, the first passengers came in. And our vice principal, Roger Melendi, gathered us up and explained to us that these people would be tired and traumatized. And even though we were eager to help them, he didn't think they should be walking into a crowd. So Gander Academy, you come in the main door, there's a long corridor that goes right down to the gymnasium, but just inside the door, to the left, there is our library. So he lined us all up in the library where we wouldn't be visible, so the people would come up the stairs and not see us. And like good primary and elementary teachers, we all lined up. And as people came in, Roger welcomed them to Gander Academy. And he would kind of put his arm around them this way and guide them. And he would walk them down the hallway, and he would scoop a teacher out from this invisible line that they couldn't see. And he would pair us up, and he would tell us where to put the person, and then he would get the next one. So the first passenger I met was a man traveling by himself, and Roger said put him down in the gymnasium. And the gymnasium was our deluxe suites. And you'll see in some of the photographs of the time, there are a number of gymnasiums, but our gymnasium is the one with the stick figures, big stick figures on the wall doing different types of sports. And there's colored tape on the floor for taping off different games for younger children. So I very easily recognize Gander Academy pictures. And the various heights of gymnastic mats, which if anyone's done gymnastics, you know they're filthy. And this was our best we had to offer, and that was the first place we put passengers. So I walked a gentleman down, and I presented him with a mat that was maybe this thick, and it was kind of almost a double size. And the first passenger I met looked at it and he said, you know, there's probably going to be other people who need this more than I do. And so, thinking quickly, I said, I'll tell you what, you put your stuff on it, you claim it, you take it as yours, but then if you see someone who needs it worse, it can be your option then to give it up. And he thought that was a good idea. So that was the first passenger I met. He was obviously thinking about other people. I don't know if I ever saw him again. I don't know if he gave his mat up or if he kept it, but I do know that neither one of us knew at that time that he would be there for 4 nights. So if he gave it up at some point, he probably did regret it. So the passengers just kept arriving, the buses kept coming, we just filled the gym and then started filling classrooms. The other passengers that I remember very distinctly walking was a family from Georgia in the United States. I remember calling the little girls Georgia Peaches, and they're pretty little girls, maybe 3 and 5. And the dad was carrying one, and the other one was so tired she could just barely put one foot in front of the other. And I took them to Betty Thibault's grade 1 classroom, which is such a long walk in Gander Academy because it's a big school. And I remember wondering, what will these girls remember of this experience? I remember being very aware of that. And I've wondered about them ever since. And only last year found out from a friend of mine, a former student of mine, that they actually ended up going to her house and she's still in contact with them and everything is good in that family. So that was somebody I wondered about for a long time. I took people home then, all the way across the road, and they sat in my living room and they were completely silent, I guess shock, and I let them use my phone to phone home. And at that time I had 2 separate phone lines. I had a home-based business, so they used both phones. I never thought about it afterwards, about phone charges or anything like that, but nothing showed on my phone bill. One gentleman took a card from my business and said, "Is this you?" And I told him it was. And for probably a year and a half, I used to get an occasional postcard from a German man named Christoph, and I can only assume that it was him. He would send a postcard from wherever he was in the world. There was a young couple from the United States who was traveling back from Italy. They told me that they did not want to leave this to fate, that if they got to the New England states, they had family members that were close enough to come and get them, and they wanted to know how would they get out of here. So they left my house that night with an index card with the now famous description from the musical, taxi to the Goose, and the phone number, and the bus to Port aux Basques, and the phone number, and the ferry to Nova Scotia, Marine Atlantic, and the phone number. And I know that the bus in Nova Scotia was Acadian Lines, and the phone number, and then the ferry in North Sydney. So I provided them with all of that information written down and explained the process to them. But also knew enough, I guess because we had been told at school, to tell them not to leave without speaking to their flight crew, not to go anywhere I don't know how we knew that. There must have been some points where we were given information, like not to let people wander off because it would impact what would happen afterwards if there were people missing from a flight. They left me a beautiful bottle of Italian wine, and I had a thank you card from them afterwards, and I don't think that they left. I think that they stayed with their flight. When I went back to the school to get more passengers, to bring them home to use the phone, there had been 5 phone lines installed, 5 additional phone lines installed at the school. It was the second week of school, so in the hallway outside the vice principal's offices were piles of cardboard boxes with school supplies that had not yet been opened. And on top of the boxes were telephones. And beside each telephone we put a couple of chairs, and because we're teachers, primary teachers, we had atlases, globes, and books of flags. We have a French immersion program, so we had a lot of staff who spoke French as well as English. But other than that, we were limited in our translation abilities. So we used the visuals and helped people identify what country they were calling. They would write down the number for us. The teachers would deal with the operators, and that was a way to speed up the process instead of trying to have an operator who could translate each time. So I looked at that and realized that I could serve more of a purpose there than bringing 6 more people home to use the phone. So I sat on the phone lines then for hours, as did my colleagues. One gentleman came up and he said, Swiss. So we looked at the maps and the globes and the flags, and it was like Switzerland, and they gave me the number and we put the call through, and there was no answer. And I said, I'm sorry, there's no answer. And he could hear and he understood, and he went away again. And about an hour and a half later, he was in front of me again. And I recognized him and I said, Swiss? And he said, no, Brazil. These were transatlantic flights. So he phoned Brazil, he phoned his destination or his family there and gave them the details, and then asked them to phone Swiss and let them know that I wasn't on one of these flights. So it was not just the talking to family and finding out if they're okay. It was also the reassuring to family that we weren't on any of those flights. So these people had a real concept of the fact that it could have been them because they were on a plane. And the information was still so early about the flights. We had two televisions set up, and that was the hardest part, was watching the people see the attacks for the first time, because they hadn't visualized any of it, they hadn't seen any of it, and until you saw it there was no way to understand the horror. So that was like seeing it for the first time, every time. Still difficult. Once they phoned home they were fine. Once they made contact, they settled. They knew if they got through, they knew their family was okay, they knew they were okay, and everything settled. They got something to eat. One of the televisions was in the theater at Gander Academy, which was also a food station. And there were people who slept in that room for the full 4 days. They couldn't be away from the media. There were other people that chose never to go into that room again. They went to the other food station. They couldn't be around the media. It just depended on how you were dealing with it, coping at the time. And it just went on for days. And we just did normal stuff for us. I spent most of my time in the office at Gander Academy. The second day, one of the British pilots came in, Captain Robert Burgess from Virgin 21, and that was a flight from London to Dulles, Washington. So he came in and introduced himself and said that he wanted to speak with his passengers. So we selected a room where there was nobody sleeping, and we made an announcement and had its passengers directed down to this large room. And a quick head count made us realize that there were people missing, so I offered to take notes for him. And he was lovely. He explained to them that because their flight was from London to Dulles, Washington, their destination was Dulles, that was where he intended to take them as long as the airspace opened. But if the airspace remained closed, or if the airspace were to close when they were traveling, he would have to return the aircraft to London. But he assured them that Virgin Airlines was aware that so many circumstances had changed that they would make every effort possible to get people wherever they wanted to be, because they may no longer want to be where they had purchased their ticket for. And he was very calm and very reassuring, and he explained to them too that there were a number of aircraft, and that he said when we are in queue to take off, he said if there's any kind of a disruption, we could be moved back in the queue, and it could mean that we are here much longer. So I took notes for him, and we went back to the office, and I typed it up, and he read it over, and we printed it off, and I started a bulletin board then for each of the 4 flights. And he would phone me every day and give me a little update. Usually there wasn't much news, but just the fact that there was an update there reassured the passengers. So he would dictate an update, I would read it back, and he'd say, okay, type that one up and sign my name. I then would start phoning the 800 numbers for the other airlines. And I would tell them it's Diane Davis calling from Gander Academy, Gander, Newfoundland, Canada, and we have your passengers from Lufthansa flight 400. Is there any update to give your passengers, or should I give them all this phone number? And there'd be a little pause, and all of a sudden they'd realize, oh no, we don't need 300 more phone calls, and they would usually move me up then to a supervisor. There was never any information to give. There was never anything new, but I could then go back and post on the bulletin board, I spoke to Lufthansa at 2 o'clock. They are aware that you are here. There is no update at this time. And it was just, again, another way to try and keep the stress level down, which is, you know, it was a different situation, but it's the same kind of thing we try to do in the classroom all day long. At the 72-hour mark from the time I went to school that morning, the vice principal came in and asked who's been here since the beginning. And there was a group of us that had been there all day and all night and all day and all night. And he ordered us out of the building, and we said, no, we're fine. And he said, no, this has gone longer than we expected, and we need you to go home and sleep, because we might need you again, and we're going to put some other people in. So again, I came all the way across the road, and I slept for 3 hours, and then I went back. I think I slept twice in the 4 days. I think the second time someone phoned to ask me a question, and I went back. On the morning of September 12th, we had 770 people sleeping on the floors at Gander Academy on blankets and pillows from the community. By that night, they were on army cots. The cots arrived. In the night of the second night, anyone that was awake, we gave them a cot, and then as people woke up to use the bathroom or because they were uncomfortable, we would slip another cot under them. The school was staffed 24 hours a day by volunteers that were mostly teachers, retired teachers, and substitute teachers. I learned things about my colleagues I never knew, and it was all good. And we just responded to the needs. One lady came in one day and wanted to know who was in charge. And I asked her if she needed something, and she said, no, I'm trying to figure out who's in charge. So so again, I asked her if there was something she wanted or something, and she said, no, where is your military? So I explained to her that we had a small Canadian Forces base here in Gander, and again asked her if there was something she needed. And so she said, who is telling you what to do? And I looked around the office, and we kind of looked around at each other, and anyone who knows me knows that nobody tells me what to do. But I said to her, I said, we're teachers here at the school, we're just volunteering. Is there something that you need? And she all of a sudden stepped back, and she said, I'm in the reserve. I'm military reserve. And she said, I'm trying to figure out where your National Guard is. Is there not a military presence leading this? And we looked at each other and we said, no, we're teachers here and this is our school. And she was shocked. She was just amazed. So then she wanted to know, is there something she could help with? And I said, well, we need help cleaning the bathrooms. Okay, she said, I can do that. And off she went. Another lady, when she was making her phone call, was phoning Monaco. And, you know, in my head I'm thinking casinos and Princess Grace and all of these things. And because I spoke French, I could eavesdrop. And she's talking about the food. And she's calling it les gâteaux de grand-mère, grandmother cakes and cookies, and telling whoever she's phoning in her first phone call in all of this how good the food is and what good bakers we are, and that she didn't know people still knew how to cook like this, which I thought was pretty amazing. It just went on for days. Everybody that I teach with has stories. Everybody that lived in the community and was here at the time has stories. We will never know all of the stories. I still feel like my story is just one tiny little story when I know that all of the teachers responded in all of the schools, not just in Gander, in Glenwood, in Lewisporte, at the college. The substitute teachers were there, the retired teachers there. The teachers, older kids were all dragged in and helped. So it's strange then with the musical and the documentary to be singled out, try to represent them well. Yeah, that's a lot of my story.
What about the book, when the day the world came to town? I think he mentioned that the mayor of Frankfurt stayed at Academy.
Yes, so I think there was the mayor of Frankfurt, Germany was here. I'm not sure if she was at the Academy or if she was at the high school. And then there were different stories that I've learned from other people and from the book. I wasn't interviewed for the book. Some of the stories cross over and come from away and the book. And some people think that the musical was written from the book, but it's actually two texts written about the same event from different interviews and whatnot. But the book draws a lot of attention to some of the different stories that happened here and the different responses that happened here. And there were stories there in the book that I did not know because I only knew what was the bubble of Gander Academy. So there were things that happened in my school, for example, after Captain Burgess spoke to the passengers. A little while after that, there was a woman came into the office and she was completely distraught. She was pretty much hysterical, and it took a lot of calming to get her to calm down and get her to breathe and get her to settle like we do with little kids when they're really upset. And when she could finally speak enough, calm enough, she told me that there was a man who was trying to get everyone to vote where the plane would go. And she was terrified that because he was loud and he seemed to have a certain influence, that he was going to impact where she was going to end up. And so I had to sit with her as a grade 3 teacher with a certain knowledge, but certainly not a full understanding of flight plans and air traffic control, and then how all of that changed with this disaster, and had to confidently tell her that voting was not going to impact on where your plane is going to go. He can make all the noise he wants. If it makes him feel better to make noise, let him make noise. Stay away from him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Even the pilot can't change the flight plan. It will be someone else's decision, especially with what's going on in the world right now. And, you know, the captain just told you he's going to try and take you to Dulles, Washington. And if he can't take you to Dulles, Washington, he's going to take you to London. But his first priority is to get you to Dulles, Washington. So then when I saw the play, and in the play they kind of make a joke of, let's vote on where the plane's going to go. Like, that happened. I saw that. 85% of what you see in the musical come from away. I witnessed at some point. I didn't see Beverly Bass talk to her flight, but I took notes for Captain Burgess. Captain Burgess came back to Gander on October 11th and presented the school with a bag of cash that was collected on his flight in many denominations, and a check for the school for $5,000. And an invitation for 2 students and a parent each and a teacher to travel to London as a thank you to Gander Academy from Virgin Atlantic for our hospitality. And because I'm a ridiculously lucky woman, my name came out of the hat of 50-some teachers, and I got to accompany those children to London. And the nearest Virgin flight would be from Boston to London. So they flew us Air Canada to Boston. And Captain Burgess changed his roster for that weekend so he could fly our flight as a recognition of us. And he notified there were 2 flights that landed in Gander. One was a Children's Wish flight. They were the 2 Virgin flights. And he notified the air crew on both flights that had landed in Gander on September 11th that we would be traveling to London and what the dates were. And 13 air crew chose to change their work roster in order to fly as crew on our flight, which is just the craziest thing to me. And we went to London and we had a marvelous time, and we went to see Les Miserables. We took these 2 little kids to see Les Miserables, and we saw Buckingham Palace, and we did tours of London, and we went under London Bridge, and we did all of these wonderful things, and we had dinner with Richard Branson on the last night we were there, and the Canadian High Commissioner. And it's just, and then we thought, well, that's it. That's all done. Then on the 10th anniversary, there was an announcement made at Gander Academy, very mundane, very flat. If anyone was here on September 11th and you want to talk to some people, they'll be in the library tomorrow after school. It was it. And because there were some events commemorating the 10th anniversary and emotions were stirred up, there was a group of us that went. There was at least a half a dozen, maybe 8 or 10. So it was 10 years later. Some people had retired. Some people maybe weren't in school that day. Some people were gone to another school. Some people were busy. You know, it wasn't really an appealing announcement. Some people were going, oh, that's going to be work. That's a trick. Don't go for that. But we went and we talked to this young couple, and they were lovely. And I will say it again. I looked at David and I said, what is it you're researching? And he goes, we're writing a musical. And he was just so positive and excited. And my cynical mind went, oh my God, isn't that cute? He thinks it's a musical. And they were nominated for a Grammy Award for the music, and Tony Awards and Olivier Awards in London. And we didn't know. We didn't know what they were doing or what would become of it. And probably they didn't realize either at the time. So we told our stories, and then they went, and that was the end of that, until a couple of years later, when we had an email from Irene saying, I don't know if you remember us, but we've written this musical and it's going to play at Sheridan College, and there's going to be a webcast if you would like to watch it. So I happened to remember it and watched most of the webcast. I missed the first little bit. And it was fun, and it was cute, and it was funny to see the mayor singing and dancing. And I thought, wow, you know, that's cool that they did that, and that it's been performed, and that they thought to tell us about it. Gone again. Then a couple of years later, another email from Irene inviting me to join them for dinner with some producers and directors, and asking me to get a hold of a couple of my teacher friends, and they were coming to Gander with these producers and directors. So I passed the word on to my friends that were invited, and I offered to do a tour of Gander Academy for the producers and directors, because the school teacher in me is thinking, wouldn't it be cool if they got their little show on stage? And so they came, and again, they pulled up at Gander Academy. I looked out the window, walked across the road, and took them in. And I took them inside the door and just stopped them inside the door, and basically set up the whole scenario of what I've told you in this interview about how we heard about it, and how we saw it on the TV, and then how I registered at the town, and the whole procedure. And I had them kind of all set up. And then I walked them through the building as if they were passengers coming in off a bus. Because the teacher in me is thinking, I gotta do a good job for these kids. And we walked through, and I showed them the gymnasium first, and explained about the gym mats and how that would have been our luxury accommodations. And we went to the library, and we looked at pictures that were there, and I explained that that's where one of the televisions was, and that there had only been two. And we eventually went to the staff room, and we sat on furniture that was purchased with donations from the passengers, and we talked about what had happened. And then later that evening we went to dinner, and then later that evening they did a screech-in. And at the end of the evening I came home, and I did a Google search of some of the people I met that day. And the first person I Googled was Kenny, and Google offered me images. And when I clicked on images, it was Kenny and Marlena and Oprah Winfrey. And I kind of shook my head and went, what's this? Did some quick research and found out that I'd spent the day with people who were Broadway producers, and that this was who David and Irene had with them. And I still in my mind thought they must be courting them. They must be trying to convince them. So I messaged Irene that night, and I said, do you know who these people are? And she wrote back, and she said, I'm living my dream right now. And she said, they're telling us we're 1.5 years off Broadway. And they actually were probably 2.5 years, because they took their time. So then my joke, because there's always a joke, was instead of giving them a tour, I should have auditioned. I really should have auditioned for that musical. I could play it myself. And, you know, it was fun to joke about, and it was fun to think about what might happen with David and Irene and what they did and how it might look. And then I followed them on Facebook, and when it was in California, I shared it to groups that I might be in Facebook, what might have Newfoundlanders in California and things like that. Promoted it, banged it through my Facebook, you know, cheerleading for them. California, New York State, Washington State, then Washington, D.C., Then they announced they were coming to Gander, so I bought tickets the first day. And I missed the first email, but I got a reminder email telling me that I was invited to see the show and that I was invited to a gala dinner the night before the show and that I was invited to a reception. I responded to that. I'd already bought tickets, but I thought I'd like to see it twice. That would be cool. And I had messaged Irene. I volunteered with refugee families. And I had messaged Irene and explained to her that initially we had 2 families here, Syrian families, but that we had just gotten word that we would be receiving 2 more families in September before the show came in October. And I asked, would it be possible to get sponsorship for these 8 adults to see Come From Away, because I thought it would be a good introduction to them, to the community they've just come into. And in 5 minutes there was a reply saying, short answer is yes, details will follow. And I thought, wow, that's cool. So we went, they came to Gander, they were setting up, and the Friday, the show was on Sunday. On Friday, no, the show was on Saturday. Friday, maybe Thursday. I was at one of the Syrian refugee families' homes. Anyway, it was before the show. And one of the committee members came in, and he had this guy with him, Kevin. Kevin Turf, and Max said, he was a passenger here on September 11th. And Kevin comes right in and goes, so were you here on September 11th? What did you do? So I started telling him I was a teacher at Gander Academy, and he went, you're in the show. I said, no, you're mistaken. He said, honey, I've seen the show. So I didn't argue with him, but I knew he was wrong. Because I was in the Syrian home, and there just would have been too much translating involved with my Google tablet trying to explain to them why I was arguing with a strange man in their house. So I just left it at that, and I knew he was wrong. The next day we went to this gala dinner, and it was lovely. It was at the airport. It was assigned seating, and I was seated with Beulah Cooper. And Beulah and I had never met. I knew her son Aubrey. We had mutual friends years ago. I knew him well enough to have a beer with him in a bar or something like that, but I didn't know him well. Just knew he was a nice guy and he was friends of friends. And I met her other son, and I met a lady who stayed with her, Monica, who stayed with Beulah on September 11th. There's a couple Gander girls seated at the table, and Leo and I. And the other place was for Astrid Van Weeren, who was one of the actors in Come From Away. So I thought that was pretty cool that we got to sit with one of the actors, and she came and she knew Beulah, and introductions were made around. And I knew Beulah was in the show. I knew Bonnie was in the show. I knew Claude was in the show. I was an expert on the show because I'd seen the webcast years before from Sheridan College. And in the webcast, it was Beulah Cooper at the Legion. So Astrid said, so where were you on September 11th? And I told her I was a school teacher at Gander Academy. She asked me how my day started. And I said, it was a crazy hot day. And Leo was on strike. And she said, yeah, that's how we do it. She said, you know I play you, right? And I just looked at Leo, and he's looking at his plate, and he's just shaking his head sideways like, oh my God, where's this gonna go? And I don't even know if I remember much of the rest of that night. And then the next day we went to the show, and in the afternoon I went with the Syrian families. And the producers, Irene and the producers, had not arranged 8 tickets. They'd arranged 18 tickets. So all of the families could go. I didn't even have to arrange babysitters. All of the kids got to go. They sat in the first, second, and third row as VIPs, and they got to see this show about the community they just come into. And because of the language barrier, they were only able to understand parts of it, but because of the music and the emotion, they loved it. They were so excited by it. But Astrid came across stage wearing what would have been my uniform for most of my career. There's only so many places to shop in Gander. Beulah might have owned the same outfit too, and introduced herself as Beulah Davis, a teacher at Gander Academy, and that just blew me away. Coming out of the theater, out of the hockey rink, people were saying, "How did you keep that a secret?" And there was only one way. They didn't tell me. And then it's continued from there. It was once the shock of it was over, because 85% of what I saw that night I had witnessed, so it was all so familiar. But once the shock was over, then it got a little bit uncomfortable at first to be singled out, because all of my colleagues did what I did. We all did the best we could at that time. So that was a little bit uncomfortable. Sometimes it still is, but my colleagues have been really good about it. They know that, especially when the camera is on, I try to represent them well. I'm very aware of the fact that I'm representing teachers at Gander Academy, teachers everywhere, that I'm representing my community, I'm representing my province, I'm representing my country, I'm representing the family values I was raised with and the things that I believe. So, you know, I take it on with a certain level of responsibility, but I'm having fun. I've met beautiful people who are so in need of hearing the story, so desperate to hear positive stories, so desperate sometimes to know for sure it really did happen, that people really are kind that way. I've had more hugs and thank yous and taken more pictures with people than I've ever would have wanted to do. But I've come to the realization that, you know, taking the pictures is not about me. It's something that makes them feel good. And if that makes them feel good, same as if you hold a door for them or help them with something, then I've become more comfortable with that too. I don't know. What else? That's a lot.
Can I ask you more about the first meeting with David and Irene?
In the library, the first time I met David and Irene.
How old was they approximately?
Well, it was the 10th anniversary, so it's 8 years ago. To me, they look like babies, and even the others who were interviewed by them at the time. I mean, Irene was doing her master's, I believe, in New York on September 11th. So they're not babies, but they've got really good genes. But they were young, and they were, you know, eager and squeaky clean, and it just came across sometimes as, oh gosh, I don't know, like you were almost worried about them because they had this big dream and maybe it wasn't going to happen. There was 6 or 8 of us for sure. I know Tammy Mills was there. I know that our librarian was there, Joanne Burt. I know that Maureen Burton was there. Different people told stories too of connections they made with passengers, and hearing from passengers for a period of time afterwards, or some of them still had connections. I didn't have those kind of connections because I didn't bring people home. I stayed at the school, and the one connection that I made was with Captain Burgess, and we stayed in touch. You know, after we went to London, we stayed in touch. He was here on the 15th anniversary. He brought his wife over on the 15th anniversary, and I invited them for dinner, and we cooked them foie gras and codfish, and that was really fun. And when we went to London to see Come From Away in February, when we went to the opening, I made sure to ask that he would be invited. So we got to watch Come From Away with him and his wife. And it's kind of fun because the Captain Bristol character, this fantasy romance character that goes on between the British pilot and Annette, there's a couple of scenes. And that's just a bit of fun that actually was written in. So I have been warning him for a few years. By the way, there's this scene that's kind of an exaggeration of a pilot working with a school teacher. So it was hilarious to actually sit next to his wife and watch that scene. And I also that night and that day met one of the cardiologists. So to sit in the audience and watch out of the corner of the eye the scene of the cardiologist coming out when the bathrooms needed to be cleaned, and see this cardiologist enjoying it so well. That's the other thing that David and Irene did so well, is identifying so many groups and individuals. And I know there's probably a whole lot of things that I don't know about, but I know, for example, there's a scene around costume party where the mayor comes out and passes out blankets to people. And then as the scene continues, they take the blankets by the corners and they shake them. And these are folded sweaters and jackets. And then there's a big flourish as they all put them on. The next time you see the show, on the back of the stage, playing a passenger will be the actor who plays Claude Elliott. So it would be Joel in New York, or it will be George in Toronto. And my third time seeing the show, I realized, it's the bell at Gander Academy. My third time seeing the show, I realized that that character at the back as a passenger puts on a navy sweatshirt with the big Gander Academy logo on the back. So the attention to detail is amazing. I thought I was invited to the gala dinner because I gave a tour of Gander Academy. Also, I had an email from the costumer from the Broadway show. She said, David and Irene gave me your email, and she was wondering if there was a Letterman jacket for Gander Academy. And I said, no, it's kindergarten to grade 6, so it would be a t-shirt, a sweatshirt, or a baseball cap. And she wanted to know where she could get the logo for Gander Flyer hockey sweater. The hockey sweater never made it in the show. But that Gander Academy sweatshirt is because I sent her the information for Papa John Sports and told her that's where it would get printed. So when I see that on stage, I know Gander Academy is represented that way too. There's a scene where the bowl of chili comes out, and the Doug character says, Bonnie, you should come home tonight, but I've brought you a bowl of chili. And that is a shout out to all the air traffic controllers. I took a phone call at Gander Academy from air traffic control one evening, and they said, we're sending breakfast tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock for 200 people. So I knew, as an individual in my Gander Academy bubble, that air traffic was preparing food. I didn't know until I saw the show 3 or 4 times that that bowl of chili is a reference to the air traffic controllers, because when they were finished doing their breakfasts in the morning, then they would start making chili to send to the shelters. So all of these little details that include so many people. I have friends, their son saw it recently, and they were so pleased with the references to Salvation Army, because they're a Salvation Army family. The references to the Red Cross, to the different religions, to all the communities that housed passengers. There would be no way to reference the outlying communities that helped. There's just so many ways. In Millertown, somehow they made an announcement, maybe on the local cable or on the radio, and they did it like a garbage collection. they asked people to put clean bedding and non-perishable food at the end of the driveway in boxes. And they went through like a garbage collection and picked it up in trucks and drove it to Gander. Like that's just remarkable. That's 3 or 4 hours away. And they helped too. The time that I met David and Irene with the interviews, apparently we talked for 3 hours. I would love to see a transcript of that. I can only imagine. I think it would be pretty interesting to hear now after the fact, and to hear what elements were used. I did ask Irene, maybe last year, I sent her a message and I said, at what point did Beulah Cooper at the Legion become Beulah Davis, teacher at Gander Academy? Because it just confused me. It's marvelous, but it's still just this big mystery to me. And what she told me was they wanted to use the school as more of a primary scene, and that it then made sense to make Beulah a teacher. And I don't know how me and Beulah being a teacher all came into it, but I guess because we had those couple of interactions with the original interview and then giving them the tour at the academy. And I think now that Beulah and I know each other, we have a lot more in common than we ever would have known. We're both funny, I say the character is saucy, and I blame that on Beulah, but I'm pretty sure she must say the same thing about me. I always make sure when I tell people the story too, that I explain to them that Beulah Cooper was a volunteer at the Legion, and that's where she met Hannah, that Hannah was on the Aer Lingus flight, because I think that story is so personal between them that I always want to make sure that they are understood, that that's really a true story and something special between them.
One of my favorite stories from the musical is the story of Nick and Diane.
Absolutely. Nick and Diane are like the most fun to watch in the show. I've asked him, and he said it in interviews, he said it's just like renewing their vows. Like watching them in the show, there's sparks flying between them, and they look at each other, and they, you see that they're remembering it every single time and reliving this whole romance. And it's beautiful to watch. It's fun to watch. It's fun to sit near them. It's fun to get to see the show with other people who've had an experience of 9/11, or to get to take family. I took my family to see the show in St. John's this year when the Canadian cast played here. And for my granddaughter to see the show, because she knew nothing about it. She knew about 9/11, she knew that there were attacks on 9/11, so we watched selected parts of the You Are Here documentary. I didn't watch the first part with her with the attacks. She was only 8, there was no need for that. But I started with there's a shot of the gymnastics mats in Gander Academy. So I started with that and then went through. And it moves from that to Bonnie and the Cats, and Chloe loves cats. So we watched it through, and to give her a little bit of background before we saw the show. And the first thing she said when the documentary was over was, "I'd like to watch that again. Can we watch it again sometime?" And I said, "Yes, of course." And the first thing she said when the musical was over was, "I'd like to see that again." And then she wanted to know if she was the only one that cried. But it's a remarkable gift to us that this has happened.
How did it change your life?
Oh yeah, traveling, and it's, I retired 3 years ago, 24th of June, 2016. I taught for 30 years and I retired, not knowing that I was a character in a musical. I was volunteering with a Gander refugee outreach group, and I had made a commitment to help the families when they arrive. And the first family arrived 4 days after I retired, so life got really busy really quickly. We had 4 families arrive in 4 months. It was good because I was busy, I had beautiful people in my life, they needed help, and I love to be a helper. It's also very interesting to know that most of the people on that refugee committee were also in some kind of leadership roles on September 11th. I think of Mac Moss, for instance. Mac was the head of the College of the North Atlantic. He was also the head of the refugee committee. It's the same thing, as just a different group of people. We're giving them shelter, and we're giving them clothes, and we're reassuring them, and we're helping them to get through what has happened in their life. So my first few months were really busy in retirement, and then all of a sudden I find out I'm a character in a musical. And that was a little shocking, like I say first, a little disconcerting until I got my head around how my colleagues might perceive it, and they were lovely. So then we got the first invitation to go to Toronto. And we went to Toronto for 2 nights. And it's like, well, we've got to go because this is never going to happen again. We bought tickets for Broadway the first day that the Broadway show was on sale. Bought tickets in November and started planning a trip at Easter. And pre-booked my hotel and my airfare and stuff to try and save a little bit of money because none of this was in the plan when I retired. And then I get an email inviting me to the Broadway opening. And then we get, I think it was traveling to the airport. Maybe traveling to the airport from the Broadway opening. Somebody says, were you talking to so-and-so? I was like, oh yeah, why? Did he tell you? And I was like, well, about what? Oh, there's going to be a touring cast, and they're talking about London, and we're like, what? So each of these opportunities have kept coming. So we've had, in 3 years, we've had 9 trips, which has been a remarkable experience. I'm invited with a guest, which is amazing that I get to share this with Leo because he was doing his bit on 9/11 too. We all did something different. He was a janitor at school, he had a bus license. He drove a couple shifts on the bus. He took cable out of the house and hooked up over there, and he helped where he could. So all of these trips have been really amazing, and they pay our airfare and they pay our hotel and whatnot. But then we've had so many trips that we're starting to accumulate expenses and things like that. So I went back to work this summer. Really fun job at the Banneken Canteen on the Fogo Island Ferry. And I get to meet people from all over the world. And I have met people from all over the world this summer who have seen Come From Away. I have met people who've seen it in Australia, who've seen it in various parts of the States with the tour, who've seen it in New York, who've seen multiple casts, who've come to Newfoundland specifically because of it, or who've come to Newfoundland and heard about it, now they're going back to watch it. Yesterday in Appleton we met people who are driving back and going to stop at New York and see Come From Away on Sunday on their way home from Newfoundland. So my life has changed in that I've had all of these amazing opportunities to travel and see places I probably never would have gotten to Melbourne, Australia otherwise. It's also given me an opportunity to talk about the refugees and the refugee situations, and I tend to be a political creature. I think it's my responsibility as a teacher to continue to teach. So I've been given opportunities through Come From Away to talk about that. When I was in Seattle, there was a function, and one of the producers, Kenny, was not expecting to see me there, and when he realized I was there, he called me to the front of the room and had a microphone, and I said, no, you speak to your friends, and then he said, no, come here right now. And so I went to the front of the room, and he introduced me as Diane Davis, one of the real people in Come From Away, the school teacher. But then he passed me the microphone and said, tell them about the refugees. And he gave me this opportunity in front of a room to talk about the success of Gander Refugee Outreach and how we've been able to bring 4 families here with community sponsorship, and how in the 4th year these families are all holding jobs that they got 3 years ago. They're all self-sufficient. They've all got their driver's license and a car on the road, and they're paying taxes like the rest of us, and they're complaining about the price of groceries like the rest of us. And their kids are going to school, and they've become a part of the community. And that story of welcoming people and helping them out parallels with what happened on September 11th in so many ways. I really think that it does. And in the fact that our community has welcomed them and continues to welcome them, and that they feel welcomed and have chosen to stay here when so many refugees are trying to get to a city or someplace else. They don't feel at home where they are, and our families feel at home here. So that's been an important thing. Come From Away has provided me with a platform to talk about things that are important to me.
What was your favorite kind of Stop the World Please moment, I guess, related to all of this experience? Either like 18 years ago or related to Come From Away musical?
There are 2. 18 years ago, I met a woman, and I don't know what happened to her, and I still wonder about her. I found her crying in a classroom at Gander Academy, and she was a travel agent. And she was so upset. And she had so many emotions going on, but she felt that her career was over, that she would never be able to work in the travel industry again. And she had a certain amount of guilt, wondering if she had put anyone on any of the flights that were used. And I still wonder about her. Her name was Sue. She stayed at Gander Academy, and if she ever sees this, she needs to reach out to me. So that's one. The other one happened in New York when Leo and I went on our holiday at Easter 2017. We met, we had gone to the 9/11 Museum on our first trip to New York when we were invited for the opening. And we had a beautiful tour of the museum, and it was very overwhelming. And we had also had a tour of the 9/11 Tribute Museum with our friends who were first responders, telling their story at Ground Zero. So there was so much emotion to it that when we went to the 9/11 Museum, we saw most of the exhibit, but I said to Leo, I can't do the galleries right now. It's too much for me right now. We're coming back in a few weeks. I want to come back, but I can't do it right now. He said, yeah, that was fine. So we left. When we went back on our holidays, we had been given passes to go to, we were invited to come back to the museum, so we had been given a free pass. So when we went back on our holidays, we're in the lineup with our pass, and we struck up a conversation with the gentleman ahead of us. And he was lovely, and he was with his son, and he told us he had just made the biggest deal of his career, and that he knew that he would be able to put his kids through college. This really wonderful thing had happened for him professionally. And he was in New York City with his son, and he was taking his son to the 9/11 Museum, And we had this great visit, and then he asked us where we were from, and we told him, and he knew nothing about the Gander story. He knew nothing about Come From Away. And so we told him about it, and he was just amazed. He was just so taken with it. So as the line progressed, we eventually got to the wicket, and he was ahead of us, and he said, I want to pay for myself and my son, and I want to pay for the 2 people behind us. And I wouldn't let him pay because I had free tickets. And he was so disappointed. So that was my other stop the world moment. I realized that there are times in your life when you should give someone the opportunity to do something nice for you. When I thought about it after the fact, I knew this man had money in his pocket. I knew it was not going to take anything away from his family. And I could have easily then paid my tickets forward to someone else. But in the moment, I was thinking I didn't want to bother another person. And sometimes if we don't bother another person, we don't get a chance to interact. So that was a big moment for me. And a few times it's come back to me. One time recently with my dad, I went home and he'd had cataract surgery, and every time I would go to get groceries or gas, he would throw money at me and I'd throw it back on the kitchen table at the end of the day. And he finally said to me, I want to give you something for having come home and helped and done this. And I said, but I don't want anything. He said, but I want to give you something. And then I remembered the man in New York, and I said, okay. So Dad gave me this pile of money that was on the kitchen table that we'd been passing back and forth all week. And I went to Charlottetown, and I'd seen a beautiful outfit in Charlottetown that I really wanted to buy, but it was more expensive than I would spend money on normally for myself. But I wanted it for Australia, for the red carpet. And Dad gave me this money, and I went out, and as I was getting ready to leave, I just flipped through the money and I counted it, and it was the exact amount for the outfit in Charlottetown.
It's the exact amount?
It was the exact amount.
Wow.
So sometimes we just have to say, thanks, Dad, and accept it, and realize that it makes the other person feel good to be able to give us something. It's not because we didn't need it or we can afford it ourselves or whatever. Sometimes the gift is in accepting. That's one of my big takeaways from this.
Anything else before we finish?
No, that's got to be
Okay.
way too much.
Thank you very much, Dan. It
You're
was
welcome.
a pleasure.